Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fantasy Cricket Podcast. I'm Nick, once again, as always, forever stuck with Azza. How's it going, Azza?
Good, Nick. Good to be here. A lot of cricket going on as usual.
Yeah, it's been an eventful week in terms of cricket. We've had some further England batting collapses. Just one last one to end the series on a collapse in true England and Australia in recent times fashion. Um,
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to talk about that. I think maybe closer to the start of the English Test summer, we can sort of cover what needs to be done for the good of English red ball cricket. Um, in other news, India lost the series to South Africa, the one-day series.
They got
Captained,
absolutely
they
pumped.
got hammered, and captained, I believe, by KL Rahul.
Like KL Rahul, the old captain, is now just a player.
Yep.
Uh, yeah, India got pumped. South Africa played really well, I thought, the entire time. They were captained well by Temba. It was a very interesting series as well. After a long time, I think many viewers find one-day cricket to be interesting.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it wasn't India's under 19 scoring 400 odd in a game, but it was good.
Yeah.
It's a big score week. Maxwell also got 150 odd in a big bash game.
Yeah.
It's been good. As a KL Rahul had a bit. It's been under the spotlight a bit now that he's captain, but big news coming out in the last week in terms of the IPL. Um, Franchises have
Yeah.
have picked up um, two new franchises rather. Ahmedabad and Lucknow have picked up three players each,
Yep.
and it's looking quite interesting. What are your thoughts, comments,
Nice segue
concerns?
there from the South Africa series into the IPL. So,
It's
for the benefit of the listeners, the IPL is now going to have two new franchises. So I think that's going to be 10 franchises in total.
Yep, because
Um,
we always think that there can never be enough IPL games. Please give me more. I'm so not bored of watching Punjab play
yeah,
Sunrises. That's the
yeah,
stuff I signed up
exactly. I
for.
mean, IPL is the all-consuming, all-encompassing
I mean,
entity that's
IPL
going
is
to
the
become
only
cricket.
thing that exists in cricket, right? I mean, if it weren't for the IPL, there'd be no point watching cricket.
Well, at least for now. It's one of the things, but I think eventually it might become the only thing in cricket. Like the NBA is the only thing in basketball, um, and we're totally fine with that, right, Nick?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's good, right? Like cricket
Yeah,
should be only the IPL. I want more ridiculous alliteration to describe a boy hitting a ball with a bat. You know,
yeah. Speaking of, I don't know if you saw, but the Lucknow team is going to be called the Lucknow Super Giants.
the Lucknow Super Giants. Isn't that
Yeah,
wasn't that like the Pune name?
yeah, exactly. It's quite interesting. But the Pune was still rising, the rising
Oh, right.
Pune
So
Super
this is now
Giants,
the risen one. This is like
the
they're
risen one.
gonna go
Yes,
with it. Are they gonna have a phoenix as a mascot or a
I don't think they're
logo?
that clever, to be honest.
They're not that clever, are they?
No.
Um,
Um,
what's the Ahmedabad
but
team called? Any idea? Or have they not announced it yet?
I'm not sure. They might not have announced it.
I don't know.
Just
Maybe.
getting back to your point though about the two new teams. So Lucknow actually has retained or picked KR Rahul for the incredible price of 17 crore.
Yeah. And that
So
makes him the
presumably,
joint
well,
highest paid IPL player.
yeah, yeah, but that's ridiculous amounts of money. Um, he's a sort of multi-player, multifaceted player, brilliant fielder, wicket keeper, captain, and of course, great batsman.
But
So I
apparently,
guess,
as according if you spend time on the cricket subreddit, apparently he's the worst choice. He's awful. He has
hmm,
he has zero people skills. He's deadpan. He doesn't excite people, which is funny because 2 months ago Kohli was the opposite and he was the worst thing. So just goes to show you that Reddit really knows its shit.
Well, Reddit has the pulse of the people for sure.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, look, these guys are professional athletes. They live day in, day out. They wake up in the morning. They train really hard, and this is all they think about. So, well, they don't have anything on the Redditors. Let's be honest,
Yeah. Well,
who are just sort of casually tapping away on their phones.
I mean, I
But
I
getting
beg
back
to
to
differ.
Lucknow, KL Rahul, Marcus Stoinis, Ravi Bishnoi. The third choice is quite interesting.
That's an interesting pick.
Um, yeah, 4 crore, but they just picked him out of the three players they had to pick. Ahmedabad, in fact, interestingly, picked Hardik Pandya as their main marquee pick, along with Rashid Khan. And then the third player to round it all up is Shubman Gill. So I guess they're being a little bit more traditional, we can say.
Well,
So interesting.
it's interesting. Sorry, as I think basically the logic behind what's gone on is Lucknow have basically gone. We're going to get one sort of top tier, one quote unquote mid tier, but not quite mid tier as far as Stoinis is concerned, and then one like lower tier but potential. Whereas
Yeah.
Ahmedabad are gone. You know what? We want three guaranteed top players, and that's what they've gone out and done. With a question mark on Hardik Pandya, in my opinion.
Yeah, the question mark with Hardik is always with injuries as well, and then when he's constantly in the cycle of injuries and recovery, it surely does affect his form as well.
Yep.
There is a question mark, but then he's a very bankable and experienced IPL player. But I suppose that's enough for those two teams. They will be in the sort of spotlight
He's
now
also going to
coming
be
to the
captaining.
auction. Yeah, he will be captaining, so that's a lot on his shoulders there, to be
Yeah,
honest.
it's a good thing he has a side strain, not a shoulder strain. But I don't, I don't know whether he's captain before. I think he does captain. Is it Baroda State that he
Oh,
plays
does he?
for?
Okay.
I think he
Yeah,
has. I'm
yeah.
not sure. Don't quote me on that. So I mean, I for one, I'm looking for the commentators to absolutely hype up pointless matchups when Hardik plays against Mumbai. What's I'm sure Ahmedabad are going to pick up um, Krunal in the auction. That's
Yeah,
my
yeah.
hot
It
take.
would be cruel to separate the two.
It would be.
Um,
Some would say it would
yeah.
be Krunal to do so. Uh,
Um,
any other things that have caught your eye? I think
just a few things that I have in my notes here. Very interesting correlation between how well a team performed in the sort of previous season and how many players they've retained, or well, to say how much purse they have remaining. So,
yeah,
you'd expect the top teams: Mumbai Indians, Chennai Super Kings, Delhi Capitals. These are sort of the consistent, well-performing teams. They have sort of the lowest amount of purse remaining because, well, they have the most consistent squad, so they
yeah,
don't really have to chop and change as much. Punjab and Sunrisers had an absolute horror of a season. Punjab has been having horror seasons from time immemorial, basically. So
yeah.
they've
They
decided to completely change up their squad. Um,
as usual.
Pun- Punjab does this every single mega auction.
Yeah.
Uh, doesn't get them very far.
Well, I mean,
Um,
I don't. I think Chennai showed the way earlier, which was then followed by Mumbai and for a couple of seasons KKR, and then Rajasthan kind of tried to do it in between, but weren't as successful. And then Delhi are probably the next team that have done this properly, which is you've got to invest in the young Indian talent first. You've got to have
yeah,
a good Indian course, the Indian Premier League. You can't rely
exactly.
on having look at Bangalore. They've got Virat, which is great, but then you can't rely on Maxwell and Christensen and De Villiers and these guys. You can't have your international players bail you out all the time,
Yeah,
which is why I'm
it
really
becomes
excited.
even more sort of poignant, I guess, your point, Nick, because in the times of COVID, players are jaded.
Yeah,
There's this travel restriction. Someone can get COVID in the blink of an eye. They might want to spend more time with their family. There's all kinds of
I mean,
extenuating circumstances.
I'm going to go as far as to say I wouldn't retain I wouldn't retain an overseas player, no matter how good with the exception of maybe Rashid Khan, for what is more than a quote unquote equal Indian player, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
KKR have spent 12 crore to retain Dre Russ. Dre Russ was really questionable last season. He's had his issues with injury. Um, why not invest in someone a bit more? I mean, I know they got to the final and whatnot, but they've now got 48 crore left to play with. That's not a lot of money for a team that then needs to build up a core. There are two Indian picks, are good picks, Varun Chakravarti and Venkatesh Iyer. Those are two good picks. Um, but I
Yeah,
just feel that some of these decisions that have been made across the teams uh, are questionable. Chennai makes sense. Um,
yeah, I agree.
Mumbai makes
No,
sense.
no disagreements there, to be honest. I'd say that oftentimes there's clash of between what the analysts slash coaching staff have to say versus what the owners have to say. The owners might be getting on well with a few players more than a few others, and that might explain a few things as well. There's all sorts of dynamics there within the franchises, which sometimes actually play havoc to the franchise's performance.
That's what it is. I mean, it's basically you see this, I suppose, in the IPL because the franchise owners are so closely related. Um, so to the team, so they seem to have a lot of influence, etc. At least from the outside, that's what it seems like. Before we move on to the main topic of today's podcast, which is the PSL, which is another subcontinental T20 league, which is full of entertainment. We can't not talk about Delhi Capitals because that's a team that we both support. It's a team close to our hearts. Well done on hiding the yawn there, as I know it's early for you. Um, quickly, um, I'm cautiously optimistic for Delhi. I think they've made a really sensible choice. I know a lot of people were questioning the picking of Nokia over Rabada, but Nokia's
Yep.
coming in at about 6.5 crore, whereas KG was probably a lot more. So, on the balance of
Yep.
things, I think they've done well. Rishabh at 16 crore, which,
Rishabh at 16 is might be a little bit expensive, but they're sort of banking on him now for their next until the next big auction, or I think they might even be phasing out auctions. So whatever
yeah,
succeeds this. So Rishabh at 16, every team has that sort of marquee Indian batsman, wicketkeeper role, which they pay 10 plus crore for. So Rishabh, fair enough. With Andrik, I think I support this decision.
yeah,
My 2 cents on this are that KG bowls a lot.
yeah,
In fact, Jared Kimber said this in one of his sort of podcasts that KG might have bowled the most balls in the last sort of 5 years compared to any other bowler, and that's gonna sort of hamper his injury
yeah,
constraints as a fast bowler. And that's just because he's so good that South Africa uses him for every single possible
yeah.
competition, um, league, everything possible. And so Andrek Norkia, I think, might be a better shout. And I think Delhi has also retained that essential core,
Yeah,
and they might be looking to build with players of the same caliber now.
yeah. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they do spend a bit of money trying to bring Shikhar back in again. That's an
Yeah,
opening combo that worked well. I think it's all about who they pick up. We'll do an IPL auction episode later on, but let's jump into today's main topic, which is the PSL, the Pakistani Super League. It starts on the 27th of January,
yeah,
which is day after at the time of recording. It's actually, I mean, it's a league that I didn't watch a lot of initially, but as it's gained a bit more attention, it's really been one to watch. I've
yeah.
been,
Look, I really enjoyed it last year. We started following it because of this podcast, to be honest. Also because we wanted to play fantasy cricket, regards to the PSL,
yeah,
and doing a deep dive into the league. Really interesting. It has elements of Pakistani cricket and Pakistani cricketing culture in it,
yeah,
which make it super interesting. So, The first thing that comes to mind, the IPL, it's all about the sort of marquee Indian batsmen because that's what India produces, great Indian batsmen.
Yep.
The PSL, you see that often the highest fantasy point scorers are the sort of fast bowlers.
Yep.
Um, and that just speaks to the quality of the bowling in that league, which makes it very interesting.
It's also
Um,
interesting from a fantasy point of view, as that it's at least for me is that because there are only 6 teams, um,
yeah,
you get a better idea of what teams feel like in terms of matchups, etc. I think
yeah,
matchups are a big thing in T20 cricket now. If it's a 10-team league like the IPL will be across different stadiums and different sort of grounds, you have to spend a little bit more time. There are things that are a little bit more up in the air. When it's another round of Quetta versus Multan Sultan, you know that okay, I can bank on these players performing. I'm going to put my money on Imran Tahir, for example. Bank. Yeah, I think Imran
yeah,
Tahir is still
yeah, yeah.
still
He
for
is.
Multan Sultans, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Let me. Yes, he
um,
is. Well, he's
he is.
he could be a pinch hitter after his performance in the Legends League cricket the other day. Um,
Yeah.
props to him. All right, how do you want to tackle this? It's a lot for people to digest. It's a new tournament starting day
Yeah.
after tomorrow. Um, I feel like we could just should we start from the top? As in we start with Multan. They are the winners. They are the defending champions.
Yeah.
Um, and I
Um,
believe they've got a new coach as well. I feel like Otis Gibson. No, that was another piece of news, right? Otis Gibson is no longer there.
okay.
No, never
I
mind.
just
I
want to
stand
say
corrected
with
again.
Multan, they sort of Multan seems to be a team which is larger than the sum of its parts.
Yep.
They sort of overperformed if you look at their individual players, but it's a tight run unit. They did really well to make it into the sort of semis last season, and then they did really well to win the whole thing. They of course are lucky to have the ICC T20I Player of the Year,
Yeah.
um,
Exactly.
Mohammad Rizwan,
I mean, talk
and then they
about
have
an incredible turnaround from the end of the PSL in 2020 to where he is today. He's really
yeah,
had a stellar year, and
incredible, incredible. He had an amazing year. One of the top sort of fantasy point scorers as well. I alluded to the fact that from every team, the top fantasy scorer might be a fast bowler. Well, that is true in most teams, but for Multan, it's been by far and ahead in the last season. Rizwan, and then followed by Shahnawaz Thani, a very promising talent, great fast bowler, and Sohaib Maqsood, who can hit the ball a
I mean,
long
he
way.
absolutely smacks it
Yeah,
when uh, when he gets going. Bit like old Liam Livingston, who
yeah,
contrastly to Rizwan, um, had a really poor end to last season, and so that's these are the nuances that are quite interesting.
yeah, quite interesting to be honest. They also have Imran Tahir. It's a good squad. The Blessing Muzerbani, who's about 8 feet tall, Zimbabwean cricketer. It's a good core, and most of that core is intact, so it's going to be quite interesting
Yeah, I
for
mean,
Multan going ahead.
with you know when you have a good blessing, things should go well for you. So
Yeah,
things look decent for them. I
yeah,
think I would imagine they're up there along with probably Islamabad as the favorites,
yeah. Islamabad, probably Karachi as well,
and Karachi as
up there.
well. Yeah, I mean, see, again, that's the point. It's such a small league that there's
Yeah,
maybe no out and out favorite. Let's jump on then. Multan ended up playing Peshawar in the final last year, I believe, um,
yeah, that's right.
and they've
And then won
got
it all.
they've got some they've got some interesting players. Well, everybody's got an interesting player, but I I think we talked about it last year. Everybody sort of rem- got this image of Wahab Riaz bowling in that 2015 World Cup,
Yeah,
particularly to Shane Watson, and there's something nice about watching him bowl. So Wahab Riaz is their captain. Um,
his captain. He was also top point scorer for them, fantasy wise. Again, last season. They have it's sort of quite similar to Chennai Super Kings,
yep,
this franchise, because it's built around an old core of Pakistani players.
yep,
They've got Wahab Riaz, Shoaib Malik, Kamran Akmal. All of these guys are sort of veterans of the Pakistan cricket setup, and they all seem to have performed quite well. The question is, of course, going to be how they do as time goes forward. Of
exactly.
course,
That's that's a bit
um,
more that's a bit more difficult. So I see this almost. I mean, they've gone big on their big overseas power players in Liam
yeah,
Livingstone. They've got Sherfane Rutherford, who can also hit a big ball.
yeah.
They've got even
Well, they've got
Ben Cutting, who's sort of able to do
yeah.
both. Um,
Well, Hazratul Azazai as well.
yep,
Um,
Other, and
he did quite well for them last season.
I
Came up with about 1,400 points.
yep, exactly. Couple of players will be unavailable for them for the start of the tournament. Those guys are going to be that's Saki Mahmood and Liam Livingstone are with England and the West Indies,
Yeah,
um, which actually, on a side note, has been a very interesting series so far. Um,
yeah, very interesting series.
any Kamran Akmal, I think, will be playing. He's 40 years old, still seemingly going strong. Um, he leads the tournaments in 60
Exactly.
dismissals.
They've got a bunch of 35 plus year olds who are carrying that franchise through at the moment.
Um, do you think? Do you think that might mean that their success could be hampered this season? Almost as if,
Yeah, look, it's always an iffy thing. Fitness is going to be a concern. Peak
yeah,
performance is going to be a concern. Um, these players sort of try to make up what they can with their experience for these things, but it is a concern
yep,
when your core is based around these sort of older players. Um, yeah, I think that's. But they still were finalists last year. Although Islamabad and even so you could argue Karachi sort of underperformed.
yeah.
Because if you look at the squads
Well, let's
of those teams,
let's jump in. Sorry to interrupt. I kind of got bored of what you were saying. Let's jump in on Islamabad. You mentioned them. As Delhi fans, we can resonate not just because it's the capital of their country, but also because the familiar Delhi story of being table toppers and then not even making the final
yeah,
is the story of Islamabad last season. I mean, at the end of the group stage, they were by far the best team. They were everybody's favourites, and then they kind of just lost their way. They lost the the
hmm
the
that does happen
eliminator, and then the
in
qualifier.
T20s though. To be honest, it's often not enough of a sample size, especially when you just have six teams in a franchise, and they're just playing each other. There's just not enough matches for the for some. They can be freak events, and that's much more likely in T20 cricket.
Yep.
And that often explains why these sort of strong franchises don't do as well. But Islamabad is still a good squad. They've got that core around Shadab Khan, Colin Munro, Hassan Ali,
Yep.
Fahim Ashraf. These are good T20 players, and
Yep.
it's a smart franchise.
Yep.
They've got Alex Hales as well. So I think they've got the entire top order covered,
Paul
along with
Sterling.
their sort of Paul Sterling as well. Yeah,
Um,
um,
they're gonna
yeah,
miss
and
Usman Khawaja, but
yeah, yeah. From my stats here, Uzi gave them a bankable 1,200 points the last season.
yeah,
Um, but I suppose there's other players who can take up that mantle.
yeah. No, and I think
Um,
I think they showed last season that they're a very good team. Obviously, you don't get to where they did at top of the table. Without it,
Yeah,
it's maybe the hope is that they've got some a little bit of a extra little bit of something to help carry them forward. Um,
yeah,
Along with Islamabad, then let's talk about Karachi. Let's follow it up. They've
yeah.
got
Karachi is the sort of big other marquee team,
yeah
They've got, of course, the best player, Babar Azam, Mohammad Amir, Imad Wasim. These are big players. They sort of tend to underperform, you could say, Karachi in the league, but that also sort of speaks with their fantasy points. You'd see that their top fantasy points getters scored considerably lower than their counterparts. So you could expect them to do better. Either way, it's an exciting franchise.
yeah. Well, they've got some interesting players, some interesting
Yeah.
named players as well. I'm going to pronounce it Cobain, and
Hmm.
in a hope that that is actually the correct way it's meant to be pronounced, because that's what you're meant to do with Coburn, I think, right? You know, I mean, I think the
Yeah,
cock is
that's right.
silent. Um,
Yeah, I think so.
so we uh, we
Cock is
can.
missing.
I mean, yeah. I mean, Decock is missing from the test side now.
The cock, yeah.
Quinton. I like Babar Azam obviously as a captain. He's a good leader. He always looks great. He's been a stalwart. They've got. I will admit I don't know some of quite a bit of their bowling is it's not that it's not good per se. I'm just not very sure of their bowling. They've got
Yeah.
they've got Lewis Gregory, who's done a little bit in the IPL.
For
I believe
England,
he was with Bangalore, and then and with England. Has he played any cricket for England yet? I don't remember. Um, he may have done against Pakistan in that
he did
series.
against Pakistan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, then of course Chris Jordan's sort of an old hand, but as a bowler, he's a good bowler. But he can be expensive. Um,
Yep.
any
I'd say Mohammad Ilyas is sort of their big Pakistani bowler, apart from, of course, Mohammad Wasim. Sorry, Imad Wasim.
yeah. Yeah, I think. I mean, as I said, I don't really know of
Yeah.
the bowling attack so much, but again, their top order looks pretty good. I think Mohammad Nabi is a great player to have on your team. He's really versatile.
Yep.
He's got a lot of skills. Um, so yeah, I think it's worth watching. Worth watching how they get along as well. Let's go on to Lahore then.
Yeah. Lahore, of course, again, a very solid team. Rashid Khan, Shaheen Shah Afridi, Faulkner. So an absolute terror of a bowling attack.
The goats.
Although, sorry, my mistake. Faulkner has moved to Quetta now, I think.
Oh yes, he
Um,
has.
but yeah, even still with Shaheen Shah and Rashid Khan, it's a very scary looking bowling lineup. And then Mohammad Hafiz and Fakhar Zaman as their sort of big. Sorry, Haris Rauf as well.
Is that big?
In their in the big bowling, and then Hafiz and Zaman as their big Pakistani batsmen. So it's a clever franchise. They've got the big Pakistanis, couple of overseas players.
Yeah, I'm excited for Phil Salt.
Yeah, full salt. True. He played against Pakistan. I think a lot of these English players are getting picked now because they played against
Yeah, I
Pakistan
mean,
last year.
it could be. I think Phil Salt is like almost Sevag-esque in the sense that
Yeah,
he doesn't care. He's walking on and he's going to try to hit you for six first ball. He'll he'll get out for zero, or he'll get out for even if he gets out. His job. He thinks his job. Well, I don't know if he thinks. I'm not a psychic. Um, I get the impression that for him, if he can get on the pitch and score 20 off six balls, even if it's streaky, doesn't matter.
yep, yep. He did that against Pakistan last year. And in fact, 20 of 6 balls, or whatever the case, is quite useful. Is actually
from a
more
points point of view.
from a points point of view, exactly. And also from just the franchise point of view. A lot of these teams are now data driven, and they'd rather have someone who scores 20 of 6 rather than 35 of 30. It's more valuable. So look, there's six teams in this league, and they're all very evenly matched. It's very interesting. I'd say Quetta is probably the sort of underpowered team
Well, that's the
in the
team we
league.
have to finish up with.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and
let's
that's the reason
let's.
why we're finishing up with them.
Well, I mean,
And there's a reason why we're not saying
we say
last, but not the least.
yeah. Well, we save the best for last, but in this case, the last for last. So
Yeah. Um,
were they bottom last year? They were, right?
should have been. I'd be surprised if they weren't.
Ah, yes.
Um,
According
yeah.
to the Cricketer Team Guide, and I quote:
Okay.
Quetta Gladiators endured a woeful PSL 6, winning just 2 matches.
Yeah.
Sin-
Well,
Since
their
since
highest point
lifting the
scorer.
title in 2019, the Gladiators have won just 6 matches out of a possible 20. That's not a
Yeah,
good return on investment.
it's quite bad. Sarfaraz Ahmad at 1100 points at their top point scorer. It really says it all. 1100 points is sort of middling for most other franchises. And in this case, I think fantasy points is a very good metric for how well your players are performing.
Yeah,
So it makes sense. They've got a few other sort of younger Pakistani players, Adam Khan, Usman Khan, Weatherald, of course not Pakistani, but this is young talent.
they've
Um,
got a really interesting young player named Will Smead as well,
okay,
and a young English player um, who's a partial replacement for James Vince. They've also got a partial replacement for Jason Roy, which is Delhi's favourite West Indian, the old Shimron Hetmeyer. Um, I think, listen, on paper they've got a good team. I
yep,
It's just about you know converting and figuring out what to do to take the team forward.
yep,
They have Shahid Afridi as we think we've mentioned,
yeah,
still going strong,
yeah.
but
He's still 18, so
he's
he's
still
not he's not
18.
yet
He's
peaked.
18. He's 18 at heart.
Yeah,
That's all that matters. Um, all right, as a we're gonna sort of end the episode sort of on a fantasy note in a bit
yeah,
more detail. We are, after all, the fantasy cricket podcast, even though we barely talk about fantasy and we're shit at it. But that's par for the course. I want
well,
you.
you can't use the collective pronoun there about being shit at it.
No, that's true. Well, I mean,
You're
relative to
shit at
me,
it.
you're not. Relative to the rest of the people you play against, you're not exactly lighting the world alight.
That's true.
You know. So
Yeah.
um,
But
let's.
yeah, getting into the fantasy section, I've been prepped for that since you were droning on a bit.
Yeah, go
The
for it. Go
first
for it.
match, for example, is between Quetta and Peshawar.
You're not gonna do a
So
match
since
by
we
match now, are you? Because I don't have time for that.
no, no, I'm not going to do a match by match, but I have some poignant points for fantasy players out
All
there.
right, let's.
Look, we spoke about this last year at length. Um, there are 11 possible players that you pick, and 100 points. So your sort of par for the course player should cost you about 9.1 points.
Yep.
Anything less than 9 points with a potentially higher credit rating should be what you're trying to go for, really. So you're trying to maximize for the number of points that you get for each credit. And so I would say if you go to the all-rounders section, some
Yep.
fantasy apps, Shahid Afridi is going to cost you 9 credits.
Shahid Afridi still
Um,
costs 9. Interesting.
9 credits, yeah, and that's
Interesting.
because their algorithms are based on popularity, of how many
Right.
people are picking them,
Right.
those sorts of things. So
That's
I'm just going to say, look, be smart with who you pick. Liam Livingston at 9.5 credits is much better pick even though it's higher than that 9.1
Mind you, I picked
par.
Liam Livingstone throughout the IPL last year, and he absolutely failed me.
Yeah, yeah. That's often the case with players going to the IPL. They might do really well world over and then not do as well
In the
at the IPL. And there's other factors which we can get into later. But again, if you look at the bowling, most bowlers are going to be costing you 8.5 credits, whereas we know that bowlers give you almost as many points as a
yeah,
batsman does. So just because batsmen are sort of the stars of the show these days in T20 cricket doesn't mean that you only pick three bowlers.
yeah.
Be smart with that, and there's some good bowlers to pick here. And that's really my big takeaway here. I think we can get deeper into the nuance of fantasy cricket the coming episodes here.
Coming episode. So then, why don't we round off the episode then by I want you to starting with Keta. So basically in reverse order. Maybe give me a player from each team that you would captain.
Player from each team that I would captain with Keta, it's really difficult to pick. I would personally go with Sarfaraz
With
just because of his
Sarfaraz.
record. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
You wouldn't look at maybe a Jason Roy when he's back in, or James Vince, or
yeah. So it really depends on when they're back in,
yeah,
and that's why I'm not saying them.
or even a Shahid Afridi. You wouldn't. He bowls. He bats. He's
No, he's
okay.
far too old.
All
He
right.
didn't he didn't play last season.
Fair enough.
Um, don't have
Uh,
enough data to
fair
go off.
enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, then let's look at Lahore next. Um,
Okay. Just throwing them at me left, right, center, but Lahore is sort of
no, I'm
the
going back in
trickiest
reverse
one.
order.
Okay.
I think I've lost
Yeah,
track.
it's tough between Shaheen Shah and Rashid
I
Khan, but
think
I'd
it's
go
a
with Shaheen.
no-brainer. I think it's Rashid Khan for me. I think
Oh wow, okay.
I think it's a no-brainer. He is the best T20 bowler in the world.
Well, Shaheen Shah recently got an award for being literally the best
Yeah,
last
but
year.
I really like Shaheen Shah Afridi. Don't get me wrong. I think the reason why I pick Rashid over Shaheen Shah as a captain is because Rashid can hit the ball a bit.
Mm,
He will get you some batting points potentially as well. Um, but it's a marginal call there.
yeah,
Karachi wise, I would probably I'm inclined. Babar Azam's a real standout to captain, but I'm also would be
yeah,
inclined again to go with another Afghan player. Other Afghan being Rashid Khan with Lahore. As with Karachi, I would maybe look at Mohammad Nabi again because he bats and he bowls.
interesting.
It's that all round option.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
he'd be a tempting one.
I'd look at Imad Wasim myself. He's sort of cheaper in the credits,
Yep,
and he's that all around talent that he brings wickets and he can hit the ball as well. So
yep.
that's who I'd look at. Um, yeah,
Islamabad.
Islamabad. I think
It's like a roll
it's
call
fairly
we're doing.
straightforward. Sorry.
It's like we're doing a roll call.
Yeah,
It's
it
like an
is.
attendance.
I'm not sure with Islamabad. Would you go with Hassan Ali?
Hassan Ali or Shadab Khan, both of them stand out,
Shadab
I
Khan?
think,
Yeah,
as options. Um, I think ultimately, if you've got to captain someone, you should captain someone who, if not classified as an all rounder, certainly plays as an all rounder, right? Because I think that just gives you the added chance of getting points, or even if for example, Rashid Khan is not an out and out
yeah,
batsman,
yeah,
he'll still get you batting runs in addition to his main job, which is what you want to
yeah,
look for in a fantasy sort of team and fantasy setup.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Precisely. Um, yeah, agree with you.
um, Usually associated with Nans in the UK. Let's look at Peshawar then. I think it's
Hmm.
Liam Livingston again, isn't it?
Has to be. I'd say
I
Liam Livingston. Everyone else is sort of a bit iffy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hill that I'm gonna die on, obviously, because he's not gonna
Yeah,
perform again. But again, he bowls, he bats, high strike rate, so you're getting points for strike rate, you're getting points for thirties, you're getting
points for
points for the
sixes.
wickets, points for sixes. He gives you all kinds of points.
Yeah, yeah.
Except
Matotola would be my left field choice, to be honest.
you.
But Liam Livingston has to be your primary pick,
Except at the
captain.
start of the tournament when you get brownie points because Pat Brown is replacing him for the little bit at the start
Oh, okay.
for a couple of games. And so is Matt Parkinson replacing Saqib Mahmood. He's going to be an interesting player to watch, but
Yeah, that's interesting.
we've crossed that section already. And then last but not least, because they were number one last year, so last but first, the opposite of the Ricky Bobby philosophy, is it? No, it's not. It's concurrent with the
He's
Ricky
just
Bobby. You know the Ricky
getting
Bobby.
worse.
You know the Ricky
Just
Bobby philosophy.
yeah, I know it.
What is it then, Azza?
Uh, I don't know.
If you're not first, you're last, right? That's it's an important way to segue into who you're going to captain for Multan.
It's very interesting with Multan. I really like this franchise because of how they put together their squad. Rizwan should be your pick.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
ideally it
I
should be
think there's a
Rizwan.
no-brainer.
It should be a
Men's
no-brainer. But
T20 Player of the Year should be the pick, right? Was he
well,
Player of the Year or was he
pick
Batsman of the
Shaheen
Year?
Shah Afridi.
Yeah, no, but that's
I
because
think
it
he
was
was Player of
rigged.
the Year.
It wasn't
Yeah,
rigged.
that was rigged. Fair.
It wasn't rigged.
But Sohaib Maksud and Shahnawaz Dhani are also good picks.
Yeah,
Wickets get you more points.
yeah.
And Dhani really picked up a lot of wickets last year. And Sohaib Maksud hits a lot of sixes. Just being in the middle order, I'm not sure if he'll get as much of a chance to bat every time. So ideally, it should be
Yeah,
Rizwan,
I mean, I would pick
captaincy pick.
Rizwan, but if I just play devil's advocate to myself for a second, using my own sort of approach about trying to pick someone who does a bit of both, David Willey's in with a shout. He's a pinch hitter and
Yeah,
he's a good bowler to start off with.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I think
Good
we've
balls on that, Willie.
there's a good balls on that Willie for sure. Um, we've yeah, I think we've covered everything as a. Um, We will hope to record another episode next week where we'll have some action that would have taken place already. If anybody's listening and watching and is interested in taking part in a fantasy T20 league with us, just let us know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for your support, Mum. And yeah, Azza, thanks again. Any
That's
parting
it.
words?
No, thanks. Next month.
Yeah, that's us. Um, we'll convene next week. Um,
Yep.
hopefully we'll have some interesting, good, juicy cricket to talk about. Have a good day, Azza, and thank you
Thanks.
everyone for watching and listening.
Thanks, Nick.
Take care.